I guess we should start our conversation with our rules that we came up for that we came up amongst ourselves. So we decided we would choose 3 paintings each from the exhibition, and then we each have a surprise painting for one another at the very end. So I will pull up the presentation.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you can see this. Well, this is your pick, so I'll let you take it away with number 1.
All right. Well, I chose this great painting, a self-portrait by Thomas Akins, because I've admired Akins for many years, and this is one of his all-time great paintings to begin with, and it is he was a very it's a very forthright and unabashedly honest image. Akins was a tough cookie and very set in his ways. So what we see here is a pensive, introspective man. Some people say his paintings, many of his portraits are psychological, and so we get a feeling of that. He looks rather melancholy. He's been through a lot at this point. He was a man born and raised in Philadelphia to a Quaker family, a brilliant man who was temperamentally much better suited probably to the later 20th century in lifestyles. At the time, this self-portrait was painted and submitted to the National Academy. Akins had already run into some pretty hot water at the Pennsylvania Academy, where he taught anatomy and painting for a number of years. And he was, of course, later fired. Akins was famous for presenting his students with grueling perspective problems, one of which was for the students to draw an open rowboat from a certain angle as seen from a certain height. And they had to get it right. Everything in perfect perspective. And of course, he knew it, to begin with. But then he was primarily taught, he loved teaching anatomy. And that's not always apparent in his portraits. And the people he portrays are usually rather pensive, very much like his self-portrait here. In fact, he even had one full-length portrait titled "The Thinker," and another one by a friend of his named Miss Van Buren, where she's resting her head on her arm and not looking at the viewer, but you can tell she's deep in thought. It's a beautiful painting. As I said, they're not always that successful. Many of them are very, very dry, and they're very much in the kind of the classic European portraiture style, more toward the kind of the latter Rembrandt in form. But in personality, Akins also had much in common with Paul Cézanne, who was actually a contemporary. Strangely enough, they never met each other, but they were both could be difficult, very very set in their ways, like I say. And his portrait of Walt Whitman is one of the all-time great ones, and it's also one of the very few Akins portraits where the subject is smiling. Most of them don't. Actually, they're deep in thought. Now, should I tell why he was fired from the Pennsylvania Academy?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well.
I mean, you always tell the story of why people get fired.
Well, Akins loved teaching anatomy. And in those days, and at Pennsylvania Academy, which was open to men and women, they had women's classes and they had men's classes for obvious reasons, given the nature of the subjects they'd be dealing with. And it was all very, very proper, mind you. So one day while Akins was teaching the women's class, he had a male model wearing a little loincloth And to explain a certain detail of how a tendon in the upper leg attached to the groin, Akins flipped up the loincloth to show where this happened. And well, you can imagine this. There were giggles, and also I understand some women fainted. Well, he got his pink slip the next day, and that was it. But I think, really, truth be known, this is probably the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm sure he was, it taunted the administration a number of times before that. Very interesting man, and this is just such a gorgeous painting. I love it. Every time I look at it, I'm astonished at the its power and authority. And of course, as always, it's best to see it in the flesh, so to speak. But it has this. There we go. Yeah, look at that, man.
And I think too.
Yeah,
you
right.
know, he,
And nothing dressy. I mean, he's wearing a suit, which is rather unusual for Akins. But it's not a fancy suit at all. You can tell it's, and he's very rumpled, and his hair is all kind of disheveled. There's another story about the Pennsylvania Academy, which is rather interesting. Some years later, after he'd been fired, he continued. He was commissioned to make a portrait of the president of the Pennsylvania Academy, and so this setup was in the corner of one of the drawing studios, and they had a kind of partition built there. And one of the students at the time was Charles Sheeler. And Sheeler said that every now and then this kind of gruff man would stomp into the studio and look around, just go, whoosh, whoosh, and then stomp back into the corner and get in the partition and slam the door. The students would go and peek through the cracks of the partition and see what was going on. They could see, there's the president of the academy. And then a couple of days later, when no one was back there, the students went to take a look at the painting, and there was this painting that was almost finished of the president of the academy. And they noticed that down on what was painted, the floor in the painting, was the signature of the artist, painted in flawless perspective on the floor. And Akins, none of the students knew who he was at that point. So there you have it. What do you think? What do you think of this painting?
Well, I mean, I think what I was terrified by this painting, or the idea of this painting, before I saw it, because Akins is one of those people. If you think of all the portraits in the exhibition, more ink is spilt over this painting than any other in the exhibition. And it's kind of like a painting that reads you as much as you read the painting. Like, some people kind of see in the painting what they want to see sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a brilliant painting, because at this point he's in his 60s, and like you said, he had been fired. He had lectured at the National Academy for a while. He displayed at the annuals, and he was finally in his 60s when he was advanced to be an associate. And then he gives this painting, and then in the span of 9 days, from receiving the painting to 9 days later, he's advanced from an associate National Academician to a National Academician. And I feel like the idea that this painting came in, and this painting was so strong and had such kind of gravitas that it was sort of like, oh God, what have we done? And then these belated honors are conferred upon him. And it's just, I don't know, it gets you to think about life in a way, like the idea that, but the greatest award, he had one solo show in his entire life. Yeah. The idea that the highest medal that was given to him was by the Pennsylvania Academy, also when he was very much later in life. And it came so long for him that when he received it, the story is that he melted it down and he sold it for cash. And just the idea, like you're saying, that the students didn't even know who Akins was at that point. And so I greatly admire the idea of an artist that sort of lives their life in a certain way to make the art that they want to make. And I think that Thomas Akins is a perfect example of that. Like with the stories that are told about him, and even after being fired, a bunch of students rally together and they say, oh, we're all going to resign. They start this other thing. But he kind of says, like, I don't want any of that. Like, just do whatever you want to. Like, he's just somebody who wanted to make art. And I think that kind of like singularity and that like uncompromising vision is very admirable, because I think you have to have a lot of confidence to work like that, but you also have to have enough vulnerability to consistently investigate yourself and push yourself to be the best. Because you're kind of like, it's like he was a person who was only competing with himself.
Yeah.
But you did get the sense that like at a certain point, the slaps in the face become enough, and kind of like it's too much, where like decades go on and he doesn't receive the kind of recognition that he should receive.
He was, in a way, successful. I mean, he was,
Yes.
popular as a portrait painter. They weren't flashy paintings ever, but they were very distinguished and dignified. And but yeah, I think he kept setting the bar higher for himself, it seemed, and pushing himself. Even when he didn't have to. Rather tragic figure. Again, rather reminiscent of Rembrandt, who also had some sad final years. I think Akins, you felt that too. And although he and Walt Whitman apparently really hit it off, because Whitman, like Akins, probably would have felt more at home in the latter 20th century than the age in which he lived. They were both these kind of free spirit types, and individualists. So, well, it's a good one to start with, I think.
And I find it very compelling that, like you said, he was successful. Like he was liberated by, he had money. He was independently, he had enough money to paint what he wanted to, basically. But at the same time, he did continuously get commissions for portraits. But then, and I remember reading this, and I looked it up this morning, but 8 of his works were burned or destroyed by the people who commissioned them. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and 15 additional paintings have gone missing under like mysterious circumstances, but through the family. There was famously a portrait of kind of a mother superior of a convent. And when she passed away, the nuns destroyed the painting out of kind of preserving her image, and out of Christian charity.
Well, and maybe knowing about Akins also.
Yeah. And then a daughter refused to show the portrait of her mother that Akins painted. And the same thing with Cassatt, who people don't think of too. Like there's a portrait at the Met of Cassatt that Cassatt painted for a woman. And then once she passed away, her family wouldn't hang it because they would be like, they would make excuses for it and say, oh, she was sick that day. And I think that the paintings don't conform. This painting that we're looking at, it doesn't conform to your notion of what an artist should look like, or anything you want to bring to the painting. It's just like, here I am, take me as I am, take me or leave me. I don't really care. I'm going to go on doing the same work, and I'm going to look like a mess and still look better than all the paintings on the wall around me. And I kind of,
it's like an academic, some kind of scholar, and his. I mean, well, you mentioned Cassatt. I mean, again, he and Mary Cassatt were contemporaries. They I don't know if they ever knew each other. They were in completely different social circles, but both from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And and Akins was of an older tradition. Meanwhile, you have William Merritt Chase and Cassatt and others getting more into what's called American Impressionism, which was quite the rage. And so Akins, at this stage of his life, was very kind of old hat. It's there's a sadness there, but there's a depth that is just unmistakable, and just the mastery of the form is so impressive. So what's next? Yes.
Okay, so I chose this work after I knew you were going to choose Akins. And I think in a way the paintings operate similarly, and they share similar characteristics. And I think they're both kind of, like I said, paintings that you kind of bring a lot to bear. You kind of, when you stand in front of them, you find like your whole self has sort of shown up to look at the painting if you stand there long enough. And so this is Huey Lee Smith's self-portrait. It's painted in 1964. At that time, he was 49 years old, because I think the next year, when he was 50, that's when he was elected. And
the second African American elected to
yes,
the Academy.
yes, and the first was Henry Ossawa Tanner, who was elected about, if I'm not mistaken, like 40 years earlier. But Henry Ossawa Tanner asked, I think it's Richard Miller, to paint his portrait. So Henry Ossawa Tanner didn't submit a self-portrait to the National Academy. This is actually the first self-portrait by a Black artist to enter the Academy's collection.
Who, by the way, had been a student of Akins.
Yes. Really? I didn't know that. When?
Whoa.
I didn't know that. Oh, you mean Tanner?
Tanner, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, the reason why I love this painting is because I think, like the Akins self-portrait, there were a lot of expectations surrounding these portraits when they were going to receive them. And I think that both of them do a kind of remarkable job of saying, like, take me as I am. I'm happy with this painting. That means you should be too. But I think sort of like simply by dint of their circumstance, they sort of make a statement. If you think of like 1964, it's the Civil Rights Act. It's a time where, the Civil Rights Act, obviously, as we all know, prohibits discrimination and segregation, but it doesn't do anything to unpack any of the generational issues that now have come to the fore again and we're dealing with. And so this idea that he submits this painting to an institution that is so reticent to recognize change, because in the 60s, the National Academy, when Thomas Akins submitted his portrait, the Academy was already past a heyday, like a perceived heyday. Like his recognition is such belated honors already with Akins. And so now you have Huey Lee Smith being recognized in the 1960s, where the Academy hasn't elected a single abstract expressionist painter throughout the previous decades, and is totally ignoring any of the work coming out of the 60s that deals with politics or an art of social concern or anything like that. And so I just think it's a remarkable painting that he submits at a time when, but I'm bringing all that to bear on the painting. Do you know what I mean? It's like the painting just exists as a man that stands before you, and that's it. It's like, I'm just a man, I'm just a painter, I'm here, I made this, and those are the facts. And then sort of as you start to peel away the layers, then you start to realize how remarkable the painting is during its time. But I think it has just this remarkable presence. And like something is very interesting about the perspective of this painting, because I've stood in front of it many, many times. And whereas the Akins painting, when you stand in front of it, you always have a sense that you're looking down on Akins. He painted himself specifically to kind of be looked down upon, even though he's looking up and he has this ambivalent gaze, which is sort of like confrontational, sort of sad, a lot of pathos, but we don't know how to read it. But there is no position that you can take in front of this painting that allows you to look down on it. And I find that to be like incredibly compelling. The idea that it's like a painting that teaches you how to look at it.
He's very straight back, and chin is up. He's looking straight ahead, and it's a statement. It's confident. man here, and bold, and yeah, and it's beautifully painted. Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. And the slight, like as staged as the painting is, and how staged a self-portrait has to be, there's that like little jaunty flick of the tie that sort of is just kind of like, oh, I just sat down, I just arrived. Meanwhile, anybody who's tried to do a self-portrait knows how exacting and sometimes awful staring at yourself can be, and having to kind of compensate for thinking in the reverse, all the things you have to kind of contemplate as you're doing a self-portrait. But I just think it's pretty remarkable. And then I just think the surface is like absolutely delicious. Like it's just extraordinary. And the way that he leaves these sort of primed areas around. So it's like almost this kind of like glimmering silhouette of a person. But he only does that in the areas that he wants you to kind of accept but not focus on. So like if you look at the line of his face, he doesn't do that effect because he really wants you to concentrate on his face. But then if you look at the contours of his shoulders, he wants them to kind of just fade into the background or to kind of like hover there. And I like how he kind of like trains your attention through the paint and the application of the paint.
And I love the glow on the left, his right, that is this sort of secondary light source that rounds out the form all the more. But also, since there is this kind of warm glow to it, adds life to the shadows that probably wouldn't be there otherwise. Interesting too that both this and the Akins portrait emphasize that the ears. Yeah, I don't know. I know there's another self-portrait that the Academy has of him, and again his ear is emphasized somehow in that. He's very alert.
And I guess because I've stared at it so many times, but how abstract the painting also becomes too, like where this triangle, this like spotlit triangle right next to the tie that sort of looks like kind of like a shark's tooth. It, it's like spotlit and your attention is directed on it. And then you sort of match it with the curve of the eyebrow and just the way you're kind of, your eye is constantly dancing around the painting. Which is pretty remarkable because it's an incredibly economical work. There's not a lot of muss, there's not a lot of fuss, there's no bells and whistles in both of these works. It's just kind of like people with an unflinching gaze trained on themselves, which is, I think, kind of the best of American self-portraiture.
But every brushstroke is sort of like a sculptor's chisel. It sort of helps carve out the form all the more. But back to that tie, he has a very stylish shirt. Also, one of those shirts that kind of jacks up the tie a little bit. So looks pretty cool.
And a thin tie, like he's very the look is really good. Like it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
And also, I hope I look that good when I'm 49. I mean, he looks really good, but also it's like it's true. It's like you get the sense that it's like not a totally. Because when you paint yourself and when you paint portraits, there's a temptation to flatter oneself or to kind of paint yourself looking a lot nicer or paint your sitter looking a lot nicer. And it's kind of I think there's a realistic quality to it that kind of
well, unlike the Akins, it looks like Lee Smith could be the chairman of the board. The way he's dressed and the way he's sitting there, just here I am.
Yeah, unlike Akins, who, like, another story that I remember is there's a famous art critic and she shows up to his studio and she's just like totally writes him off because he presents himself in an undershirt, and she's just like, no, she's like, no artist could ever, there's nothing he could make that would warrant looking like this. As opposed to Huey Lee Smith, which exactly, he looks like he and should have been the president of the National Academy at the time.
All right, so on to Lois Dodd, and this is a work from the latter 20th century, And I never met her, but I've long admired her work. And oh, I love the straightforward aspect of this, and it's kind of it has such vigor and authority. She teases the viewer playing around with the classic figure ground relationship. You know, we assume that the foreground window is the chief element. It's squared to the edges of the canvas, and but no, we're drawn through this undefined ethereal space to the oblique askewed window on the other side, the opposite side of the chicken house, and then further into the green outdoors that really leads nowhere. So one's viewpoint constantly shifts, and I love that, you know, constant movement. And you know, it's a in a way it's a static image, but it isn't, because there's this, you know, this playing of the forms that keeps it very much alive. And the you know, the boldest color, of course, is through the window across the other end of the other side of the chicken house. It's just simple but magnificent. And of course, the one of her one of her earmarks, of course, is the way she moves that brush around, and just you know, she doesn't fuss. You know, it just puts it down right there, and that's it. She also has a magnificent self-portrait that is in the catalog. Is that in the exhibition also?
Yes, it's in the
It is, okay, yeah, because it's good to see the two together, because you can see that same, you know, same aspect, and just wonderful painting.
Yeah, I think she's someone too who I think she's like 95 or 94 now. And
Must be.
yeah, she's still painting. She just recently had a show. And the work has matured, but the work has kind of stayed on this track. And I think that there's something pretty amazing to having such a long career and exploring and advancing the same set of questions for so long, and figuring, well, I mean, I don't know what her paintings are about. I don't know if I could ever say what the paintings are about, but the idea that I feel like her paintings get at an idea that through painting, you might learn about the world, as opposed to the opposite, as opposed to the other way that I think people think the relationship is. Like through the world, you know, through learning about the world, you could figure out painting or figure out what to paint. And I think that the perspective and the uniqueness and the singularity and the directionality of like this vision of just like consistently going at the same set of questions is pretty remarkable. And then, you know, with this painting, you have the window, the classic association of painting as a window onto the world. And then, you know, the way that this is cropped, which is so magnificent, where you get the like, just what is that, like an eighth of a wall on the left, where you know, where you see the edge of the house, and then you have the frame, and then thinking about like the way a canvas is stretched and cross braced. You know, it's kind of like, it's a meta paint. It's deceptively simple. And I think it's not that easy to hold that much in your head at the same time and still get away with it.
It's a very intelligent painting. You know, this is a thinking person here, and you know, and this is not a classic linear perspective. It's just simple. What do you say? I guess planimetrics, where you have this plane of the window in the foreground, this strange space in between, going to the next window, and whatever's outside. We're not really drawn outside. It's just kind of there. And then the way she tips that just slightly is very engaging. Yeah.
All of these little paintings within the paint, you know, that like it almost is like a painting composed of a series of paintings. Once you start to take each of these frames and the idea that somehow all these things which seem um, uh, inchoate or all over the place somehow cohere into something that you visually recognize as a view through a chicken house. And then, everyone loves who doesn't love farms and chickens? What's American or simple?
And the general size and shape of the canvas is the general size and shape of each pane of glass too.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. Okay, so I chose this work, which I didn't plan this, but now that I've looked at them formally, they kind of evoke one another in terms of that skewed perspective that you were talking about. This is a painting by Whitney Lee Savage, or Lee Savage, it seems known, which is called Endangered Bobby. And I knew nothing of this painter when I first stumbled upon the painting. So when we were putting this exhibition together, we were kind of going rack by rack through all 2,000 paintings that the Academy has. And, we were making a long list and a short list and a shorter and a shorter and a shorter. And this painting I stumbled upon in one of the first rounds, and I absolutely couldn't shake it. It kind of stopped me. In a day that was really frantic and crazed, it just stopped me dead in my tracks. And I didn't know what was going on, but I had a very kind of almost visceral, intense reaction to the painting. And so I reached out to his family and ultimately found out kind of the story behind the painting, which is Bobby was Whitney's cousin. And collaged onto the painting, which you can see on the right, is an actual photograph. And under the children in the photograph, you see Lee, John, and Lon. So Lee and Lon, so the two kids on the outside of the photograph, that's the artist and his twin. And then in the center of the photograph is their older brother, John. And so Bobby was their cousin. And by the time he painted this work, so he painted this in 1982, Bobby had taken his own life. And I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about this painting, but I feel like there's something pretty remarkable about how unresolved and angst-ridden and beautiful and ambivalent and strange that this painting is, to be able to communicate all of the feelings that would, because I learned later on by talking to the family, apparently Lee, so the painter, Whitney, felt somehow like, because they were cousins, and he sort of felt like if circumstances were different, maybe he could have been Bobby, or anybody could have been Bobby, through the set of circumstances that he grew up with and what happened to him in his life. And so, and if you've ever lost someone that way, it never goes away. Nothing ever gets easier. And there are no answers either. And I kind of really like the idea that you could take all of those frustrations and strange feelings and unresolved things, and then you could create a work that would just hit somebody like a punch in the gut who had no idea about any of the circumstances surrounding the painting, through the actual force of the painting. You know what I mean? Because the way it's painted is just absolutely masterful. There are certain portions that are, heavily worked and modeled and beautiful. And then, for example, with the shoes and all the associations with shoes, as we know in painting, but the shoes are graphic and almost like a cartoon. And the fact that it actually has a real photo, it has this kind of sepia photograph collaged onto the surface, and everything it has to say about memory. I just think it's a wonderful, disorienting, just knockout painting. And then the more I look at his work, all of the paintings are like that. But yeah. And I don't know what that green is. I never know what this green is on his hat, which is kind of like, is it some sort of reflection on the, I imagine they're standing in front of like a roof or an awning, or they're on the front of a
Well, no, there are also straw hats that had visors that had kind of the you know,
oh,
tinted plastic sewn into them, so they you get that. But you
oh,
also see that on his on a little bit on his forehead too. It's a compelling image. There's something going on there, but it's one of those paintings that, in a way, gives us more questions than answers. And of course you dug into it and found more of the answers of what was actually what compelled the artist to make the painting in the first place. And of course, such tragedies of that haunt families for generations.
And the idea too that, in a way, the more I learned about the painting, the less I actually understood about the painting, which was kind of fantastic. Like, which was, in a sense, like the painting, like this painting is inexhaustible. You know what I mean? It's not like any attempt you make to kind of explain away the painting or be like, oh, this is that, or this is why he did that. It's sort of like the painting resists you. And the choices, the compositional choices, the formal choices, the way that it's painted, they kind of resist you. And I just love it.
Something about that hand on the shoulder,
Yes. For me, that was like the thing that pierced me. It was just like whatever's going on with that hand on the shoulder is very haunting.
Work by Gretna Campbell, and is another late 20th century painting. By the way, maybe this is a good point to mention that it's important to note that the National Academy welcomed women into its fold very early on. So, and we have many examples of that in the exhibition and in the catalog. So Gretna's work is remarkable in so very many ways. The rich tapestry of the brushstrokes and colors, it's abstract, as it were, and linear perspective is absent. We're mainly pulled into the thicket. The thicket kind of there on the right, and if there's any kind of focus, that's sort of it. It moves. Composition, moves from lower left, which is rather typical with these kind of strange, young trees, and then gradually sweep up to the right, and then sort of disappear into the background. I really think that thicket on the right is what holds our attention, and when you look at it, look into it, and again, it's so important to see the painting in the flesh to fully appreciate it. The depth and the texture is just marvelous. And so there we go. That's it. Yeah. See, there's even the shadows. There's no dullness. There's still life to the shadows. And you take a detail of that, and it could be I don't know, de Kooning or someone, Hans Hofmann, and this was a plein air painting, made right on the spot in a garden in Brazil. But really, it could be anywhere. I mean, it could be in upstate New York, or I don't know, Colorado. Who knows? It's just I don't know. It's again, it's a planimetric composition where you have masses overlapping other masses, one another, and that's how it works. I mean, there's some I guess man-made structures, some kind of structure there on the right, something in the background, maybe a terrace in between there. You don't know but there's nothing to hold our attention there. We keep going back to that marvelous thicket. There's just you want to relish again and again. It's and my friend Barbara Grossman has a piece in the catalog that she wrote about Gretna Campbell's painting, and Gretna Campbell, that is really a superb piece that I urge everyone to read and relish, like the painting itself.
Yeah, she says that in the essay that Gretna Campbell would go out in the morning with 2 hot baked potatoes in her pockets to keep her warm, and then she would, by lunchtime, they were cool, so she could eat them. Like, it's like, remarkably industrious. I do remember my first experience of looking at this painting, and it is really extraordinary, like as a painting and a surface, because you can see the parts that were laid down plein air, like on site, and then you can see the parts that were done later. And the painting itself is kind of like, it's kind of like a roadmap to its own making, if you're looking closely, and it's pretty extraordinary. And like you said, I mean, if you take a coin-sized detail of this, it looks like a complete abstract painting.
Yeah. Or Monet, water lily, close up. Yeah, it's just incredible. And what's more, it's a good size plein air painting. I mean, they're usually not. It's about 5 by 5 feet, and that's something to handle outdoors.
Yeah.
You pray it's not a windy day.
Yeah.
But so it's really a tour de force, I think. Yes.
And then so I chose this landscape by Kay Walking Stick, which was painted in 2009, which is actually a diptych, and it's on panel. And I think in a way they're doing very similar things, but I also think in a way they're doing very different. They're also doing very different things. So what Kay usually does is start with a landscape that is a known space to her, or a space that she studied. And she kind of starts with the world around her, and then captures it in such a way so that it appears like you're looking at the way that she's looking at it. It's kind of like this idiosyncratic, individualized approach to something that you could also just go out into the world and you can look at yourself. So it's not like meant to be these kind of like a veristic account of like her standing in the Grand Canyon or her standing out into wherever she's going. And then she takes primarily Navajo patterns from weavings and material culture, and sometimes superimposes them onto the work. And she uses a lot this sort of plus sign, this 4-direction symbol, which has, so many meanings to so many different cultures. And I think sometimes these paintings get, I don't want to say misinterpreted, but a lot of times the interpretation is very superficial to me. Like a lot of times they're read as a diptych that represents kind of, being both Cherokee and an American, and kind of there's an easy interpretation sometimes. And I don't think the paintings are that easy. I think that the whole point of these paintings is to hold 2 ideas together at the same time and make it not an either or situation, but make it a both and situation. Like the idea that you can be both Cherokee and Christian. You can be both this and that. And so that kind of way of living, to me, has very important implications outside of painting. Because I think that today, especially with the events of the past year, it's like people immediately want to know whose side you're on, what you think, and then they completely write you off if your views don't line up with their own. And I think that she is putting forth with these paintings a way of living and a way of thinking and a way of, this isn't just a way of painting, this is a way of organizing the world around you. And I think it has like incredibly generous implications for the world outside of painting. And I kind of just sometimes think, or I hope, my hope is that the world could kind of learn something from these paintings, the more they look at them. And I think too, you know, at the same time, she's harking back to like the dawn of American landscape painting, because, you know, you get a lot in the earliest, in some of the earliest writing about American landscape, there is this inability to think about a landscape as a thing that exists outside of one's own imagination. You know, like when Thomas Cole writes like his essay on American scenery, he interprets the entire landscape through a human perspective. Like he's, you know, the rivers are singing. Everything is personified. Like the mountains have eyes and whatnot. And it's sort of like the world doesn't exist before people come out there to view it. And that is true in a way, but also you'd be incredibly foolish to think that the world isn't going to go on without you, and that the landscape has an enduring capacity that is just like incomprehensible to how tiny a human mind is. And I think there's something going on in the way that she thinks about time, with like the day and the night and the two sides of a landscape, that is a much more you know, it's Thoreau, right? Who says like it would be in vain to dream of a wildness beyond myself, or anything that exists. Like I can't ever access anything outside of me, or in terms of the landscape, or the rawness, or the wildness, or the beauty. And I just think that she, it's not an either or, it's a both and. So it's a remarkable painting that I hope people look at more.
It is, and I notice how, you know, it's really a continuous landscape. It's it's this stand of trees, but then she's sort of chopped it in half, showing, I gather, night and day. And say, unlike Asher B. Duran or Thomas Cole, she doesn't get into the minutia of the trees. And yet one feels these trees are very alive.
Yes.
There's a I don't want to say human quality, but they're definitely very much alive. And you know that this is from her direct experience, but not as a direct experience, say, as a plein air painter going out, and as with Greta, where she went out there and painted those things as she saw them. No, this is more, she's painting it from things she has seen and is, part of her, and then she's extending it onto the canvas, and then, interposing, as you say, those, ancient symbols across the bottom. So when first time I saw this, I think I saw a reproduction of it in New York Times, maybe before she was even a member of the Academy. I thought, that person's a Native American, because they see things that way. There's this oneness with the land that comes through. That's just magnificent. Yeah.
And just like respect, just a general respect for, and it's not even maybe like that the paintings are alive, because I feel like when we say they're alive, it's like we're alive, you know what I mean? Like we're putting onto the trees. We're putting onto the trees something that like we have. And I feel like with her painting, it's more like maybe that the trees have agency, or like the trees have something. Right, yeah. The trees have something that is beyond us. Yeah. And
they're just there.
And I don't know if that's from thinking from a native cosmology, thinking about the history of American art. I don't know where that comes from, but I just think that it seems to me to be a very like wise and studied and thoughtful take that kind of forces you to take the painting seriously, and to think about the implications that the painting has for your own life and for the way that you look at the world.
Very reflective work. Yeah.
What's not? Oh, and these are our surprises. Okay, so so you chose an Edwin Dickinson. Okay, I see.
Surprise. Edwin Dickinson, who, by the way, was distantly related to Emily Dickinson. He's from upstate New York originally, but spent most of his life living on Cape Cod and in New York City. This is a mid-20th century painting. And he was an eccentric man. He was eccentric, and this is an eccentric composition. The artist places himself in the lower left, looking out the side of the canvas, and you don't look into his face at all. You just see this, kind of nondescript profile. And he was, Dickinson was famous for his premier coup or alla prima paintings, meaning that you just go out and paint something in a few minutes, and that was it. He'd never go back into them. And also his just gorgeous drawings, where he will sometimes blur edges and just or they might then have a line drawn with a pencil and a ruler with these blurred passages that keep the viewer kind of wondering what it is. So he's been described as a painter's painter or an artist's artist. His work, he had a long career, but his work there were never big sellers, but it's kind of an acquired taste. And he was not a supreme colorist by any means. They're mostly, these sort of subdued colors, which are an earmark of his work, but always very, very subtle. So we don't know what's going on with this painting here. Why would he put himself in the corner like that in this kind of room? It seems to have a skylight, perhaps. And what on earth is that thing on the right side? Was it? Well, we don't know. It could be a demonstration of linear perspective. He might have put on the wall for his students at the Art Students League, where he taught for many, many years. It's just, I don't know, there's just something I found. My first time I saw this painting, I think it was in reproduction in some art magazine. I was taken by it and mystified at the same time. Again, is one of those artists who, in a way, provides more questions than answers. And I just love it. And I saw a book of drawings by Edwin Dickinson when I was in elementary school that just stayed with me. And I thought, wow, I'd love to be able to draw like that. And and so this painting is neat in a lot of ways because it has that quality. It's a finished and highly developed work. It's not a premier coup where he just did it, one stop. He's worked on it over time, but it still has that kind of misty, I hate the word surreal, but it has this kind of mysterious, quality to it that one finds in the drawings. He also had some large, very, very, elaborate compositions that he'd work on for years. But I sometimes find that these simpler works, such as this self-portrait, are Dickinson at his best, and something about it. He was quite a character too, apparently, at the Art Students League. He had kind of like Akins in a way, very set in his ways. He felt that the easels needed to be at flawless 90-degree angles to the floor, and to make sure of that, he carried around a little pocket level, something like this, where he'd actually take it and put up next to the easel to make sure that they were, by God, at a 90-degree angles to the floor. If they weren't, he'd correct it, And he, one time, a friend of mine who was one of his students said that, they were kind of sitting around the class and, like 10 minutes late and 15 minutes late, 20 minutes. And finally someone said, well, I've got to go to the John. I don't know where Professor Dickinson is. So he went into the restroom and there was Dickinson trimming his beard. He said, I'll be right in. Yeah. So, Interesting man, and he's also a violinist. He performed in small chamber groups and Cape Cod primarily, and was known one time to arrive at a performance wearing a full tuxedo but no shoes or socks, and proceeded to play a Beethoven piece or something, Interesting man, quite a character, and lived a long time. So be it as it may, another one of those artists lived a long time, and continued to grow. And although he's lost his eyesight toward the end of his life, so in a way, those kind of ethereal, misty drawings, maybe kind of like Monet, were really the way he saw things, or didn't see them, but conveyed that through his work. He was great for having these odd compositions, like an upside down chair or something, things seen, that we see all the time, but we just don't think of as subjects for a painting or a drawing. And but Dickinson did.
Yeah, I think he's someone who has gotten a little forgotten recently, and he's worth more people looking at.
Yeah.
When I was doing the early research for this exhibition, I found a letter in the files at the National Academy where he wrote a letter to the council, which kind of, the council had all the power of governance of the National Academy. And so whenever you wanted to borrow a painting or promote anyone's work or blah, 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 you had to ask the council. And the council had kind of famously denied loan requests for this work.
No.
And I don't know why, because they weren't displaying it. And then so he wrote, and he basically threatened to take it back. Because he was like, I didn't give you this painting so you could just like put it into storage. I gave you this painting so you could show it. And I think it's pretty fantastic to just,
Yeah. He was an enigmatic person, and his work is too, say we don't look into his face. And I've seen other self-portraits likewise, you do not look into his face. They're always a little askew somehow. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if you're aware of this work. This is an artist whose name is Walter Hatke.
Jeremiah, now come on.
And this is my surprise work because.
And blushing, yes.
Well, I will say, so this work was the first time I found this work. You have two works in the National Academy's collection, obviously, as you know, and one of them was hanging on the painting racks, and one of them was put into a horizontal box where some of the other works were stored. And I kind of opened the box and I saw this work, and it was just like alive, it was kind of just like dancing, and it just, I didn't stop thinking about it for that week, that month, whenever. I just kept thinking about it. And, I'm not saying this to flatter you, but I'm saying this because I went to some installations of because, this exhibition has gone to multiple museums now. And when I was at one museum specifically, the preparators had opened up the crate, and the whole day had kind of just gone on. Like everybody was about their business and everybody was doing things. And they opened up the crate and everybody just stopped for a second and just looked at the painting. And I think that that's pretty amazing when that happens, because everybody who was standing there was very different, from very different backgrounds. Everybody looked, the five people who were standing there looked very different. And the idea that just everybody kind of just stood there for a second and was very silent and just looked is pretty amazing. So I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about this work and how you came to paint it. Because when you told me,
I didn't go to graduate school right away. Waited some 9 years after I got out of college, and had lived in New York City. It was already established at a Robert Scholkoff Gallery in New York. And then thought, well, if I needed to teach, some good people told me, said, if you want to teach and want to get anywhere with a keep your job, it's important to get an MFA, Master of Fine Arts, the terminal degree, as they call it. And so I thought, okay, well, and meanwhile, my wife and I had moved from New York City to the Midwest, where we bought a horse farm. And so the closest and best, painting department gave graduate degrees was the University of Iowa, that I'd heard about for years. And so I could get there in a day pretty easily. Usually, picked up a couple traffic tickets on the way, but I could get there. And so then it required that it was a 6-semester program. So in other words, usually 3 years. Well, I didn't want to spend that long there. So I said, well, what you can do, you can go over the summer and then shrink it down to 2 years. So I thought, oh, that sounds a little better. At any rate, I had to be in residence for 1 year. So my wife and older son and I moved to Iowa City. Actually, this is Coralville, Iowa, which is right next door to Iowa City. And we got an apartment, and looking out the kitchen window, this is what we saw every day. And so there's this elderly couple who lived in this little house. And I usually see the missus out, raking the lawn, and she would rake the hell out of that lawn. I mean, I think her husband, shown here in the distance, was ailing. I think as a way to kind of deal with her worries and all, just to rake that lawn for all it was worth. So just looking out there one day, and the light one morning was falling in this pattern, and I made an oil sketch, just a rough thumbnail sketch. First, I made an oil sketch of the setting, and put it aside for a while. And actually, I made several paintings of her, his wife, raking, of course. And then I kept thinking about that basic composition, that core image of these that house, the garage, and the man. Well, luckily I saw him, I think, twice, and he was carrying groceries on this occasion. And since I was taking figure drawing at the time, I knew I could make a quick gesture drawing of him. Bingo, and kept that. And I thought, well, okay, well, maybe I make a larger version of the painting based on the studies I'd done and the oil sketch. And so hence I stretched the canvas and started in, and really it was pretty plain composition. You just have these architectural element. I guess maybe call it an architectural landscape, but the architecture really forms it holds everything together pretty much. And and it had this, I could have, it was only a few feet actually from our kitchen window, so it was right there. But I didn't start the big painting until a couple of years later. It just kind of incubated all that time, and began painting it. And but I started just with the houses or the structures, and then added layer upon layer for the landscape elements. And I thought, okay, I need to put him into that. And so there he was, and he put me a great deal in mind of my grandfather Hatke. He kind of looked like it, and my grandfather Hatke lived in a house very much like this house, and he was a mechanical engineer, inventor, and he tinkered a lot in his garage. And so I thought of that. And so that's why you can kind of see into the garage just a little bit. And I grew up across the street from a park that had 3 ponds in it. And one was surrounded by cattails, and we'd always have, all summer, we'd have the red-winged blackbirds. And so my wife and I love red-winged blackbirds. And the blackbird did not pose for me there. I put it in just myself. And of course, it made sense to have the bird kind of looking toward him or looking toward the house. You don't know. So just, you start with a simple composition, then keep building into it. And the foliage has quite an underpainting, several rather brightly colored underpainting, which kind of, I always think of as adding kind of dynamite to foliage. So if you look closely, you can see these oranges and reds kind of popping through the shadow areas and all that. And I use fairly thick pigment, so that it gives when you look at the painting, it kind of glistens a little bit. And there's a medium I use that supposedly creates a light within that, which there's some truth to it. I mean, it actually does have this kind of luminescence that's kind of special. So, well, thank you. Any questions you have, I'd be open to them. Oh, and I donated the painting to the National Academy in memory of my parents. They're both deceased at that point. It was my mother's very favorite painting I ever made in my entire life. And she said, "Walter, why don't you make more like that?" And I said, "Well, I keep trying."
Yeah, I mean, for me, you've taken things that could become sentimental or could veer off, and you keep them in this tension that is, it just makes you stop and look at it. There's these little gestures in the painting, the bird, this just ever so subtle string that holds the doors together, maybe successfully, maybe not successfully. This man who, and you can feel almost the door like swinging back and forth, like it's working or it's not working, as a mechanism to close them. And this man who is just kind of like, I don't know, there's a cyclical quality to the whole composition that makes you feel like if you woke up and you saw the painting the next day, he would have moved or in the painting somehow, or he'd occupy a different place in the painting.
Yeah. Why is he there? And I don't know. Yeah, and the bird was kind of a dangerous move. It's one of those kind of second thoughts you have that can be killers in a painting or anything. A novel or anything, you get these kind of all these bright ideas. Oh, after the second thought, and but I think somehow this one kind of works, and partly was also a formal decision. I thought it needed something else on that left side of the painting, and because the light moves that direction, and so bingo, there's the bird, answering the call. Well, thank you.
Walter, thank you so much for doing this conversation with me, and thank you so much for donating this work to the Academy so that we could show it in the exhibition.
Yeah, thank you. No, this was fun. I enjoyed it, Jeremiah, and I'd like to thank everybody at the Figge Museum for generously providing us this opportunity just to wax poetic over these works that we love, and we hope that many others will look at the catalog and get it. I mean, the catalog is phenomenal, I have to say, and Jeremiah, you're one of the main guys on that catalog, I know, and it's truly a masterpiece, and it covers so much information, and the reproductions are absolutely superb, which is not always the case. And but I think I saw the paintings and I saw the reproductions. There's so well done, and the textural material in the catalog likewise has just lends that much more depth to the whole experience. So yeah, great show.